Okay, so to synchronize, I think I'm going to slap myself. Okay. 3, 2, 1. I'd use the word still to describe the town of Silent Hill. I've known about the games for as long as I've known about video games. I got into them through one of my other obsessions as a preteen with loads of free time and not as much friends. Horror. I spent most of my time on the internet reading creepypastas, short stories, and watching YouTube videos discussing horror. The title Silent Hill itself has been stuck with me ever since I first heard it. With all that being the case, I have only finished Silent Hill 2 for the first time by myself only recently. I've never had a console before, you see, and it is only now that I have access to a pretty good computer, and playing it for myself after watching multiple Let's Plays throughout the years was an experience I hold very dear. I've talked about Silent Hill's, especially the second game's atmosphere before, but what I missed during that I realize now with having played the game for myself is what I described with the very first sentence. A stillness. The very first scene itself is an ample instance of this, the iconic mirror scene. A slow, calm, and almost trance-like sequence with James's face plagued with pools of shadows. The way he moves his hand along his face, perhaps grazing it ever so gently, and afterwards rising up and exhaling deeply with the terrible voice dubbing cutting in unnaturally, has a particular dreamlike calm to it. The slow reveal of the dreary town, followed by James's unusually calm reveal of the fact that he's here to look for someone who has died 3 years ago, all veiled with an aggressive and an unexpected serenity. Although the ending of the game may not be very obvious for people who have never heard of the game or its premise beforehand, this opening is surprisingly open about what it is. This game is not going to make you feel good. This game is ugly, and it knows it. This game is, and it has been ever since it was released. There hasn't been any other game that gives you what Silent Hill 2 does. I mean, yeah, most good games are like that. They carve special spaces out for themselves in our cesspool of media. Some may even say that it is what makes them good in the first place. What I mean with Silent Hill 2, however, is that it simply is different to all other good, hell, great games. The best game that I've played, in my very humble opinion, is the original Dark Souls. Although I'd say that there is nothing like Dark Souls and that if you want the experience, all you can do is play it, I'd mostly be talking with boatloads of subjective fanaticism for the game. Dark Souls 2 and 3 exist, and they, although having their own spins on it, are still Dark Souls. There is Bloodborne and Elden Ring, both of which have their own things that they do better than Dark Souls does. Would it be very accurate to say that you can't get Dark Souls anywhere else? Maybe not always in the same game, but in a few games. Hell, they may even be better at what Dark Souls does than Dark Souls itself. There are new Souls-like games coming out every month, but Silent Hill 2 remains the only thing resembling what it is. There may be other games that give off Silent Hill vibes or ones that talk about trauma, but Silent Hill 2 still remains exceptional. This is why, when talking about the franchise, 2 takes on a leading position. The first Silent Hill is incredible. The third one's very good too, and I've heard people say the fourth one is very underrated as well, but Silent Hill 2 is lightning in a bottle. There is no other Silent Hill game that gives the town such a visceral, atmospheric presence. Silent Hill 2 is a Silent Hill game. Not a cult game, not a trauma game, and not a room game. I haven't played Silent Hill 4 yet. Silent Hill 2 is a Silent Hill game. Of course, it's not perfect to play. It is slow and kind of obtuse to play. The controls are very dated and the mechanics can get tedious. And the voice acting, although spine-chilling at times, is less than desirable at most others. The Eddie boss fight is one of the worst experiences ever, and I wouldn't want to fight him ever again. The whole mechanic of chasing him around through a freezer full of hanging meat and then stopping and then aiming is just the most bullshit ever. The double pyramid head fight too was frustrating, but not quite as much as Eddie's. But of course, the boss fights aren't exactly what Silent Hill 2 is known for. The perfect example that is a good microcosm for the aesthetic marrow of the game would be this little sequence in the Woodside Apartments where James jumps across through this window into another apartment. The whole scene possesses the aforementioned enigmatic stillness. The utter dreamlike nature of it is imposing. James's floaty movements, along with bizarre and quite impossible camera angles, help add to this calm. Then there is the fact that the whole space itself should not exist. 2 apartment complexes cannot be built this close. Even if you don't know this fact, it's not very hard to feel uneasy due to the utter claustrophobia this scene induces. Furthermore, the stillness is what lends Silent Hill its horror. Firstly, this stillness is interrupted only by James's radio, which flares up when there's a monster nearby, making each monster encounter feel a little jarring. Most of the gameplay in Silent Hill contains James walking up and down hallways, methodically trying closed doors. Some open, while the majority stay locked. The locked door sound feels like a nail sticking out. It's imposing and rough compared to the game's normal soundscape. A soundscape made of these uncanny but weirdly soothing tracks. This imposing stillness also makes its way into all the cutscenes, including the iconic Maria cutscene. The whole scene is supposed to be shocking. Maria's supposed to be dead. We literally just saw her getting killed by Pyramid Head. What she has to say in the cutscene too is supposed to be an exclamation point, a utter derailment of all that we have known till now.
You were always so forgetful. Remember that time in the hotel?
And yet, the game itself treats it with indifference. The camera movements methodical and slow. There is no background music whatsoever, and the conversation between the 2 is cut together in a way that can only be described as anything but natural.
Maria?
You said you took everything, but you forgot that videotape we made. I wonder if it's still there.
The pauses between every sentence, James's lack of any real concern over what the hell is happening, and the uncanny rendering job of that time. None of this is and ever will be natural. Maria's voice actor alternates between what seems like 2 versions. This is especially apparent when she says,
I'm not your Mary.
So, You're Maria.
I am. If you want me to be.
In a tone that sends megatons of shivers down my spine. This switch is as jarring as it is because of how the game treats it with a lack of surprise. Furthermore, James's willingness to jump deeper and deeper down dark holes without any inquisition or any second thought, and the game's unwillingness to punctuate this nonchalance accentuates the stillness I've been talking about. A feeling that is filled with the seemingly narratively contradictory style of the game. James should be freaking out. He shouldn't be jumping into dark holes one after the other. The game itself should be freaking out. Why is it so still? And what does this stillness entail? Why is it here? To answer that question, we may need to take a detour. Or two detours. A dream picture, it must produce such a stillness that one would be awed by a knock on the door. This is how the Swiss symbolist painter Arnold Böcklin described his world-renowned painting ominously named The Isle of the Dead. Symbolism is an art movement focused on... what was it again? Symbolist painters were interested in exploring the relationship between an idea and the image used to represent it. Another one of Böcklin's most famous works is this self-portrait alongside Death playing a fiddle. Symbolists labored to convey emotion and the vibes through symbols, which did not necessarily go along with naturalism or realism. You know, skeletons can't play fiddles because they don't have ears, and so how will they hear? You silly little goose. Anyways, the Isle of the Dead is exactly as Böcklin describes it. Looking at the mysterious, dare I say, ominous islet with the tall cypress trees surrounded by the rigid stone cliffs, which blankets vague traces of architecture beneath, all in the middle of an ever-expanding ocean, fills me with a peculiar feeling of dread. Then, of course, there is the tiny figure in white with a coffin approaching the islet in a little boat with an oarsman. The entire scene feels vaguely devastating and yet motionless and quiet. The painting itself is unmoved by what is happening. And what is happening looks to be full of such pathos that the uncaring nature of the painting itself becomes unnerving. But more than the painting itself, there is another aspect to it, namely its history that interests me very much. You see, Böcklin has painted and repainted a total of 5 versions of the Isle of the Dead. The first 2 in 1880, only months apart. It has been recorded that originally Böcklin's painting only contained the islet itself, with the boat devoid of its main attraction. But upon the request of a patron, one Marie Berna, Böcklin added the white figure and the coffin to the boat scene on the second version, which was done on a small wood piece. He then proceeded to do the same with the first version as well. As to why Mrs. Berna requested such an odd addition is, with a certain amount of speculation, because of her husband, Dr. George von Berna's death. She was getting remarried that year and perhaps wanted to mourn her late husband. Moving on, 3 other versions were painted by Böcklin over the course of 6 years for varying reasons. Each version contained a certain nuance to it that distinguished it from the others. The last version painted is the darkest and the most obscure out of all. with the white figure rigidly bent forward as if in a sort of pain, whereas the third version being the clearest out of all of them. Although the fourth version was destroyed in a bombing during the Second World War, the rest still remain in various museums across the world. What's another fact about this painting is that many notable people have owned it, or at least a copy of it. The little German mustache boy once had bought the original third version of the painting. Lenin had had a reproduction of the painting, and Sigmund Freud also reportedly had one in his office. The painting was even quite popular with common folk, too, with Vladimir Nabokov stating that it could be found in every home in Berlin. Psychoanalysts of the time also claimed that many of their patients report seeing the imagery of the painting in their dreams. What was it that this painting had that made it so that its dreamlike nature, its imposing stillness, made its way into everyone's unconscious? Why had everyone built such a personal, subjective connection with this painting? Even for Böcklin himself, the image stood for a deeply personal trauma. The cemetery within the aisle itself being modeled after the cemetery his infant daughter Maria was buried in. Maria being one of 8 children Böcklin would lose in his lifetime. Hence, the painting has become a sort of collective dream, not belonging to anyone in particular, but able to manifest the inner worlds of those who gaze upon it. Now, that, finally, is starting to sound familiar, isn't it? The town of Silent Hill manifests your traumas, or whatever it is. It's your personal hell, as it is often repeated to a fault. The monsters of each Silent Hill game differ according to the protagonist. The iconic Pyramid Head is a manifestation of James's inner urge for punishment, as well as his sadism. This is common knowledge to the Silent Hill fandom, but let us take a look upon this concept more carefully. Silent Hill as a town and as a concept is what you may call the embodiment of the psychoanalytic theory of dreams. According to Lacan, what we perceive and think about in our daily lives isn't really reality. Instead, it is a mixture of the symbolic order and the imaginary, both of which are constructions, rules, and concepts that we construct ourselves in order to live our lives. They form our reality. The reality, on the other hand, is like the sun. We may be able to take a quick glimpse or two at it with our naked eyes, but looking directly at it for any longer than a few seconds can be very dangerous for our eyes. Hence, we need some sort of protection or mediators like sunglasses. I don't have any sunglasses here, so. The sunglasses here would be our reality. A layer of fantasy coated over so as to avoid staring into the traumatic real. Dreams are often described as not real, but since we have established that our reality isn't really the real, but a fantasy, and hence our reality is akin to fantasies, dreams must be akin to the real. This is why Freud placed such significance on dreams, even writing a nerdy little book about interpreting them. Dreams are able to show us the traumatic capital R real. They show us what's buried deep within through symbols, and thus it is not that dreams are for those too afraid of reality, but that reality are for those too afraid of dreams. Silent Hill's monsters and constructions are the very same thing at its core, and thus I describe Silent Hill as an embodiment of the psychoanalytic concept of a dream. Everyone has them, and everyone can visit the town. However, each person's dreams are deeply personalized and subjective in the very same way that everyone's Silent Hill is deeply personalized and subjective. If it were an actual town that you could go to, you may even find it to be a cozy little place according to who you are. Who knows? Maybe you're an actual healthy person with no real trauma to repress. The very same thing applies for the Isle of the Dead, doesn't it? Everyone manifests their inner selves into the painting, resulting in people with vastly different and even conflicting means of thought taking a liking to the same painting, from a grieving widow to a fascist dictator to the everything is a penis man, and perhaps it is this quality that oozes the imposing stillness I've been going on about in this entire video. The town and the painting are uncannily still and unmoving, that you move for them. This can be seen weirdly realized by the Silent Hill fandom. You see, this concept of Silent Hill being something that manifests your trauma provides us with a weird conundrum, because looking at this from a meta level, we are accessing the town of Silent Hill through the main character, in the case of Silent Hill 2, dead wife man James Sunderland. And so there can be a sort of a dialectical relation between the two facts that one, Silent Hill manifests the perceiver's trauma, and two, for the player, that is you, Silent Hill only manifests James's trauma. And what happens when these contradict each other, well, you get... The situation is over with and shouldn't be brought up anymore because Silent Hill has so many great things about it, and this isn't one of them. This is the first sentence of one of the last paragraphs ever written during one of video gaming's most glorious internet meltdowns in history. And what it is a despotic move to censor and brainwash the masses, an attempt to silence the tired voice of a man sworn to reveal the truth, to cast away the blinding darkness that was deliberately shed by those in power to mislead the common people away from the horrifying reality.
Hey VB, have you read the Walter Sullivan article on the Silent Hill Wikia? I'm a new fan, so I want to confirm something there, and well, it's something else. Namely, about 6 or so paragraphs about the evil of circumcision and other social commentary on a fictional character's wiki article. I thought you were joking, but holy fucking shit, what is wrong with this goddamn wiki, Lamau? Fact that might clear up the motivations here. The guy who mainly runs this wiki is an extremely ignorant anti-feminist. Check out the talk page on this article and Control F alexshepard, he's the admin I'm talking about.
One day in early December of 2015, the then moderator of the Silent Hill wiki, alexshepard, would, from out of seemingly nowhere, add multiple additions to the Walter Sullivan character page on the wiki. His additions heavily referenced circumcision and speculation on how the character was circumcised at birth.
This article or section contains speculation. Man, I can't wait. Judging by a visit in St. Jerome's Hospital, it is also possible Walter had his genitals, penis, mutilated as a baby via circumcision, also known as male genital mutilation. There are some who theorize and compare circumcision to a dark, ancient, satanic/occult mutilation blood-flesh ritual, as well as being connected to the Illuminati, which could have led to Walter's psyche becoming influenced by the occult of the Order, and when boys become circumcised, it acts as a covenant to the dark forces on the planet and enters a pact with Satan. They also believe it is disguised as a necessary medical practice, and some doctors are satanic/Illuminati puppets. Others believe that circumcision can harm the bond between mother and son, and a man's ability to love and bond with women.
Walter Sullivan is a character that's mentioned through newspaper clippings found throughout the town in Silent Hill 2, and an actual significant character in Silent Hill 4. But as you may be wondering, no, There are no direct or really any indirect mentions of circumcision pertaining to the character. When met with some criticisms as to his actions, alexshepard would speak out against them quite aggressively.
TT Tornado, at Voidburger. Jesus Christ. Can they not, keep this off the page, or is it an admin doing this? At TT Tornado, literally one of the admins put this on the page and is shouting down people who think it's not relevant to Silent Hill now.
This tirade would then be met with disapproval from the other moderators, who would constantly remove the additions made by Alex.
You can't delete something because you don't like the truth.
This has nothing to do with Silent Hill.
Yes, it does. You are blatantly removing the effects of circumcision on the psyche, which is a core aspect of personality, and the fact that there is no compensation for circumcision victims and survivors is an injustice, and that's what Silent Hill is.
More weird and unnecessary political commentary that isn't related to the character.
Because people need understanding of Walter's circumstances. Seriously, stop trying to remove history.
Alex would also provide, quote-unquote, evidence to support his theories.
Many things in the Nightmare Hospital could be interpreted as horrific and dramatic circumcision metaphors and symbols, and the result of a barbaric, torturous, and inhumane procedure which should be banned and illegal worldwide.
Exhibit A, forceps in the stretcher. Exhibit B, possible phallic/penis symbolism. Exhibit C, possible anesthesia symbolism. Syringes, needles, and pills in meat and bloody rags. Exhibit D, possible foreskin symbolism. That's a huge ass fucking foreskin, my man. Exhibit E, a figure restrained much like how babies must be restrained.
There's also a possibility that the greedy worm monster has phallic symbolism and may be symbolic of a circumcised mutilated penis. The greedy worm monster appears throughout many of the worlds in the game, and it may be symbolic of a monstrous, circumcised, mutilated penis, searching for its missing foreskin, and the despair and horror of never being able to find and retrieve it. In other words, a man who feels violated and incomplete. Somehow, through an insane amount of sheer ignorance, stupidity, lack of common sense, and decades of Americans being severely brainwashed, circumcision was carried over to the 20th and early 21st century North America. It took North Americans hundreds of years to realize that mutilating babies' genitals without their consent wasn't such a good idea after all. Then again, it also took Americans time to stop killing Native Americans, witch burning, discriminating non-Christians, the non-religious and non-believers, slavery, racism and lynching, female oppression and LGBT oppression. So issues like male genital mutilation, animal holocaust genocide in the slaughterhouses, mass fluoridation of drinking water, trigger-happy police brutality, wage slavery, and wealth inequality would also take time. His heart is in the right place, I guess.
Alex would continue to link circumcision to dark occult rituals and government brainwashing conspiracies. He'd also heavily advocate that circumcision does serious psychological damage to the babies, and that those who disagreed were wrong and were brainwashed by the government or the occult.
I'm not ruining the entire wiki. You're just biased due to societal brainwashing. Again, a lot of you don't care because you're being brainwashed. Alyssa Gillespie, Enjoy Boari, Miss Garland, Kemi Rowe, you're all female and probably don't care about boys and men having their genitals mutilated because it doesn't benefit you. It's something you can't see. A perspective from a male who regrets their genitals being mutilated at birth because of bullshit. If you had your vagina sewn shut or mutilated, and this was a female character like Claudia Wolf, for example, I'm sure you would have different feelings.
And to justify as to why he's even doing all this, he said,
if there was a top 10 list of the best Silent Hill fans in the world, I would probably be in the 1 to 5 spot. I grew up with Silent Hill as a child, so I can see certain things in the games which other players will not.
This insane saga would end with Alex being stripped of his moderator status through a poll voted on by others of the community. And as of now, the entries stand for a somewhat obscure but really silly little part of the weird and wonderful world of the internet. I'll link some sources from which you can find more about this incident if you're interested, as I did skip a lot of the insanity that Alex had gotten up to in the span of a few days. Voidburger on Twitter is responsible for documenting the entire thing as it happened, and without their efforts, the whole thing would be completely forgotten, as the entire log history was moved to a different address, which is unfortunately no longer accessible. Anyways, It is very easy to look at alexshepard and laugh. It was totally ridiculous behavior that was entirely unsolicited. The whole thing was so extremely stupid that the entire internet of that time came together to laugh about it, with a New York magazine even writing an article about it based on Voidberger's Twitter. Now, I can only speculate, as if there wasn't enough of that already in the situation, but Alex obviously seems to have some kind of a traumatic experience with circumcision. Obviously, I can't and frankly don't want to know if he himself is circumcised or not, but my point is that he seems to have a deep personal connection, a negative connection at that, with the topic at hand. After being kicked from the Silent Hill wiki moderator team, he joined the Xenogears wiki and restarted his thing with circumcision, although not in the same extent as Silent Hill's wiki. Although not every Silent Hill fan is as unhinged as Alex is, I do think that Alex here, to a certain extent, represents an exaggerated version of every player's experience. Since, as I said, one cannot access Silent Hill purely, because of the fact that the act of gaming requires a mediator, that is, the protagonist. The player grafts on their own trauma, their own personal trauma, onto the video game of Silent Hill. This is what happened with the circumcision incident. We interpret Silent Hill as our own embodiment of trauma. Again, I'm not making an argument akin to we interpret art subjectively, as although it is true, it's doubly so in the case of Silent Hill because of its very concept. Hence why your personal hell is truer than one realizes, because it truly becomes your personal hell. Not just the protagonist's, but your personal hell. This tendency can be seen in the train wreck of a video game or interactive entertainment that is Silent Hill Ascension. Ascension gives a weird amount of emphasis on the player personalization aspect of it. One of its selling points that it wears so proudly in its marketing is that of choice.
You will have the opportunity to make decisions, large and small, that affect the story.
The community chooses what happens. This is also the promise of a player-made character being put into the story itself.
You can also be part of the show. Each day, you and other audience members can enter a cameo contest to have parts in the series.
All of this is a result of the said relationship between the two contradicting ideas surrounding Silent Hill as a video game. So, initially, the quality of the object in question, Silent Hill, is that it embodies the perceiver's trauma. But looking at it through a meta lens, we find that the player can only access it through James or Heather or whoever it may be. Hence, the circumcision incident occurs where a player forcefully projects his trauma onto the game. In this final movement, the player is responsible for the town's manifestation of his trauma. Alex is responsible for making Silent Hill all about circumcision. The community is responsible for making Ascension into whatever it is. You are responsible for making Silent Hill what you think it is. But when you look back, wasn't James always responsible for the town embodying his trauma from the very beginning? Didn't he willingly go to the town? Didn't he commit the actions that led to the trauma in the first place? In other words, aren't we responsible for our dreams? Not only do we willingly lay down to sleep, but also in that whatever we see in our dreams, we are responsible for. And it is this responsibility, or the weight of this responsibility, that is at the core of Silent Hill. This is the stillness that possesses the town of Silent Hill. The game is unmoving and uncaring of the freaky shit that's going on because it isn't responsible for any of it. This uncanny realization that's left unspoken but is there. This is the stillness that's so still in the Isle of the Dead that one would be awed by a knock on the door. This is the stillness of Silent Hill. Thanks a lot for watching this video. If you made it this far, then be sure to like and subscribe because I'd really appreciate it. I really like making these videos and it'd be cool to get some positive reinforcement. Also, we recently surpassed the big 1,000 mark, so I'd like to thank every single one of you little persons who constitute increasing numbers on my screen and give me hits of dopamine whenever it goes up. Much obliged. I have a podcast with my friend whose name is Curious, where we talk about life and media and whatever else we like pretty much every other podcast, but this one has me and Curious in it. So watch it if you're curious. Thank you again for watching. Goodbye.